say something.
So I guess I need to know from defense counsel in particular, is there an objection to having them just switch to uniforms once the closings are over?
All right.
But we're not ready yet. Hold on.
I don't think that's going to be an issue. We just reserve that one when Mr. Parrish comes back, but I don't think that should be a problem.
Okay, all right. Go ahead. You can break. Well, wait, we're waiting for Mr. Parrish. I think he stepped out to the restroom. So.
Oh, okay. We'll wait.
Sheila, you want to type the word just so I can make sure I'm getting you? Okay, thanks. So, Mr. Parrish, sorry. The question I had was, is there an objection once the case has been argued? Can I just have the jury switch to the deputies switch their uniforms? I wanted them in uniforms at the end, just so it's clear who they are for the crowd. But there's the possibility we get a question, and if we do, then we're back in here, maybe not with the jury actually, but we're back in with them in the uniforms. Is that an issue?
I don't think so, Judge.
Okay. All right.
Thank you. And I know you brought it up earlier, and about when the verdict came in. Yeah, I don't have a problem with that.
Okay. So you got your answer? So we're ready for him.
All right. District Court is reconvened.
Please be seated. Mr. Parrish, are you ready to proceed?
I am, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court, counsel. Give that up. First of all, I want to thank you as jurors in this extremely difficult case. And I want to go back for a second and remind you of when you first walked in and we were all sitting in the courtroom, and a few of you knew each other, but most of you did not know each other. And I told you at some point we'll come back and we will talk about that, because I told you at the end of the time when we got ready to make closing arguments, you each would have some idea of why this process was so important. And I believe now you've had an opportunity to understand and appreciate in a case like this why it is so important to have the type of jury selection process that we had and the questionnaires that we had to fill out. But another thing that it is important to talk about is remind you of the questions that were brought up to you. The questions that were brought up to you were the questions that, in fact, were related to whether or not you could be fair. And we pointed out certain areas that we thought would come up during the course of this trial that other jurors could not be fair on. And we went through this process where we sat down and we talked individually to jurors, and many of them were, in fact, excused from time to time. But each of you indicated that you could be fair. You knew the nature of the case. Someone had died. It was a horrific death, occurred at a mall. We talked about factors such as the change of venue, and now you have a feeling as to why this case could not be tried in Johnson County because of the impact it had in that community. And that's why the case was moved here, so we could have some independent jurors who could look at this case without what Ms. Lina said at one point: you must all have sympathy for the parties in this case, and you have to remove that sympathy. And what you're going to have to do is talk about and drill in on the facts of this case. It is an unusual case. The evidence that has come out during the course of this trial must show you that. We also talked about the process, and we talked about issues such as mental illness, experts coming in to testify on these various aspects of the case. Remember the one question I asked during the course of the process: if someone had an expert who was an expert in a Ford, someone had an expert who was an expert in a Ferrari, which one would you choose? If you're working on a Ferrari, you'd want that expert to work on a Ferrari. Now you can kind of see how that question fits in to what we were talking about, and why that was such important questions. Now you've had an opportunity to listen to all of the experts in this case. We also talked about electronic communications and the impact of that, and whether or not experts could come in and give us some insight into young people using that type of communication. And as though, can it be determined that those relationships are just as real as the ones that people have when they meet face to face. Now we know at the end of the day there are experts who are versed in that. Matter of fact, Dr. High, right down at the University of Iowa, is an expert who studied online dating that does understand the relationship issues that come into play. And so you see now why we ask you those questions during the voir dire examination, and why that issue is so important for you at that point in time, and while it's important now that we sit here. There's no doubt that this incident has caused lives in Johnson County and the people that it impacted to be altered forever. But the issue that we have here that you all will take back into the jury room is to the degree that Alex is responsible. I told you in opening statement that we're not disputing the facts. I also told you in opening statement that he did this act. And when you go back into the jury room, we're asking you to fairly use your common sense after you review all of the evidence in this case to find his level of responsibility. And after you've heard all the evidence in this case, it's not first-degree murder. It's not second-degree murder. It's a crime of passion. And we'll talk both about the crime of passion, and we'll talk about the expert evidence if you reject the crime of passion and you want to look somewhere else to resolve this case. And we're going to outline to you what the evidence shows with regards to this matter. The killing of Andrea Farrington is a tragedy beyond words that will forever alter this family's life. As I said in my opening statement, it is a difficult case, but your job is to focus on the facts of the case, because you're judges of the facts, and also to focus on the law. And although the pain and suffering of these individuals who were impacted by this is unbearable, it is your task as jurors in Story County to evaluate the case in a fair and impartial manner. And as difficult it might be, you must remove the sympathy that you have for either of these parties and focus in on the facts. As jurors, you cannot be influenced by your likes, your dislikes, your sympathy, your bias, your prejudice, or your emotions. And it's been pointed out to you that it is a very emotional case, and I don't think anyone is disputing that. As the court has indicated to you, I have an opportunity, first of all, to respond to the state's argument. And I'm not going to respond a lot because about an hour of their argument were on facts that we agree with. If you think about their argument, that is not in dispute. I said that when I made the opening statement. But there are a couple of points I want to point out that they made. He said, when I say he, Alex said, this feeling that I've had for 3 to 4 months off and on about harming someone, Dr. Logan told you that in his report. Jessica, his wife told you that. Kelly told you that he had these feelings that were building. This is consistent what he said. The next question that was brought up by the state in their closing argument, they said he sent texts to Jessica saying he was going to do this. Think about this when you're back in the jury room. Does a rational person send a text to a person he's met one time and say, I'm going to go get my Glock and kill somebody? Does that make any sense if you use your common sense? Then the state argued, well, these are his words. Look at the words. It's an experienced detective, and I'm not saying this detective wasn't doing his job. We're going to talk more about this as we go through this process. But this is an experienced detective, many years of experience, telling him the magic words to say. So we know that when you follow the taped conversation between Alex. And we'll talk about the circumstances that Alex was in at the time this statement was made. The state also said in their argument he was angry because she'd broken up with him, destroyed his ego, and we're going to talk about that in a second too. She had interfered with his job and she had led him on. Included in this is this young man's intermittent explosive disorder and borderline personality disorder. This is the other thing the state argued, and it perplexes me, this part of their argument. They said, well, he wasn't hallucinating. He wasn't delusional. He remembered everything. Did that come up at all during the course of this trial? No one is saying this young man didn't remember anything. He's not insane. Nobody is saying he's insane. We are saying his responsibility is diminished. That's a whole different matter than any expert get on this witness stand and tell you because of this particular disorder that he has, and all three of them found that he had a disorder, that either one of them tell you that it caused him to be delusional, that it caused him not to remember, that it caused him to act in some, as the state likes to call it, crazy way? No. They said people with the same disorder live next door to you and me and everybody else. But the point is that this is not an insanity defense. The state is mixing apples with oranges. This is a defense of diminished responsibility. We've said that from the beginning, but we also say the evidence points toward passion. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. Oops, wrong way. I'll get this down. It should move it. Yep. Okay, let me try it now. Let's go. All right, thank you. I just mentioned to you the fact that once you look at this case, your personal dislikes, sympathy, bias, prejudice, emotions, that needs to be moved out. You need to start this case looking at the court's instruction. All of these factors, there is no doubt that folks in Johnson County, including this woman who slept with her and her husband slept with their weapons on their nightstand, that's real stuff. But it's not part of this case. There are no charges pending that relate to how these people reacted or where they were running. That's not what this case is about. But if you want to decide the case based upon that, are you going to be fair to Alex? You have to decide the case based upon the facts that have been presented in this courtroom, not all of the impact of what happened in Johnson County. Now, the state concedes that it's their burden to prove this case to you beyond a reasonable doubt, after a full and fair consideration of all the evidence. Now, where do we start for that? We look at the witnesses. We look at their appearance, their conduct, age, intelligence, memory, and knowledge of the facts. Who are these people? Isn't that the first thing you want to know as a jury? Who are these people that we're talking about? Well, interesting enough, no one except for Mr. Isisime and Wendy Robbins have reached the age of 25. None of them. These are young people starting out on their own. And look what, now one has been working in security for 10 years. We'll move those right down to the bottom. And Wendy Robbins has been working there for 18 years. And we'll talk a little bit more about her involvement with Ms. Farrington as we move through this process and how it impacted not just this young man, but other people who she impacted. Remember what they called her and how she was acting? You can't go by how she acted on the witness stand if other people said she acted differently at the mall. You can't go by this evidence of her when she came here nice and genteel, because we know that people who had no interest in this case described her conduct quite differently when she was out in the mall working and supervising these folks. And we know also that's the person that Alex had his biggest fights with. So who are these people? Deanna Brown, his friend, who was in housekeeping, who we'll say later saw him on the 12th and saw him on a scale of 0 to 10 at a level of 10. We know that. We know who Andrea is. 20 years old, had a little bit of college, had just had this surgery which changed her life. Remember the Hans Christian Andersen piece that we talked about when we were talking about voir dire. She had become this beautiful swan. She was experiencing her life and what it was like for the first time. And we'll talk about the nature of that relationship. We had her mother. Well, I mean, we had Cassie, her sister. And then we had Carly Frederick. We'll talk a little bit more about Friedrich to Frederick, is how she pronounced her name. She came in the court, and obviously she wanted to protect her friend. But she told them on that night, that very night when they were sitting there, she was leading him on. And she said she was a flirt. That doesn't mean she was bad. Doesn't mean she was evil. But you have to think about what she put in his mind, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more also. We had Jessica, who had met him once and had was taking this class, and an interesting thing about that, remember Dr. Logan's testimony in just a piece? He was indicating, to show you how experienced the person is, and you had a chance to watch something that people rarely see in the courtroom. This brilliant psychiatrist said, well, it seems like she had some kind of experience in that area, not even knowing that she had a course that she was taking trying to calm this fellow down. And he described the conversation as bizarre, because he's having this conversation, all of a sudden he says, oh, would you run away with me? That's how an experienced forensic psychiatrist described this conversation, as bizarre. We have Alexander Kozak, 21 years old, Callie, 20. Ryan Ross, a young man who had made observations of how Wendy Robbins would act, and that was his testimony. And then we had Connor, he was 19 at the time, he's now 20, in this relationship that he describes as not breaking up. But we all know what was happening now that we've seen evidence in this case. This relationship was long past repair. no matter how he felt in terms of what he thought could happen. We know from her conversations and what you'll read when you go back into the jury room that I won't spend a lot of time with, we knew that relationship had ended. But it's going to be how she interacted with that relationship and Mr. Kozak that's going to be important in determining how she led him on from time to time, perhaps much like she was leading Connor on. And it's not so much, again, that it was evil, it was bad, or anything like that, but her mother said she was 20 years old. She didn't know what she wanted. That's what 20-year-olds are. Don't forget that when you're back in the jury room. These are 20-year-old kids. So these are these folks, and you've had a chance to meet some of them here. Now, let's talk about friends and family of Andrea. And it's important here, when you go back, you're going to have to see how these people kind of relate to each other. You're going to hear more about that as I go through my argument. Because we know Andrea had a texting relationship with most of these folks. But you're going to find something interesting about her texting relationships with them. All of it basically ends about the fifth, the time she reestablishes her relationship with Mr. Kozak. No texts are on there going out to her mother to any great extent. Cassie has already testified that she rarely talks to her anymore. We know we had Connor put in his 6'4", his telephone number, and I asked him to go through those records and find one text that Andrea had sent to him that week. You won't find one. And again, as the court said when that exhibit was introduced, it was a T2. It was introduced basically to give you an easy read. But go back and look at LL, which is the unredacted version of all the text messages, because it basically lays out what was going on with Andrea, with Alex, with Connor. These are this is the digital world they lived in. So when you go back and look at that digital world, you will see who she was close to that week. You'll see what she was saying. She was telling him she loved him. She was telling him to leave his wife. She was telling him these kind of things. But also, if you go to 515-520-9346, she's also telling another young man, we don't know who it is, the exact same thing. I want to be with you. I want to spend time with you. So is this the young man that she tells Alex on the 12th she's leaving for? But this is what she's doing. You get a glimpse into the world that was going. At the same time, she's texting Wendy Robbins. But you'll find out, as I'll later argue, that the texting to Wendy Robbins is about when it's safe for him to come up and see her. That's the text that the state didn't want you to see. Remember back when we were talking about all the text messages coming in? They had a redacted and an unredacted version. Who fought to get the unredacted version in? It was Mr. Kozak. You know why? They didn't want to put it in. They said they put an experienced detective on the stand, Detective Ron. They put him on the stand and they had him answer the question as to why it was not introduced. He had nothing to do with the telephone messages. He had nothing to do with how they were prepared. He got on the witness stand and made some statement to you all saying, well, we did it to simplify your work. Folks, that's not why he did it. He made an incorrect statement on the witness stand. And that's unfortunate. But he also got caught in making an incorrect statement because he had to admit that he knew nothing about it and they had no business doing that. He didn't have anything to do with it. But yet, these messages in this relationship will show how they tied in. You remember also a statement made by Connor. Connor said that he got a text message from Andrea saying that she was going to go with Carly Frederick, the person she was talking to at the time she was killed. Well, we know now that wasn't accurate. She was going with Mr. Taha to the mushroom restaurant. We know that. So these things that the detectives had figured out that night without looking, and 48 hours later, without looking at any of the text messages, this turned out to be just totally inaccurate information. So the question becomes, at this point, as we look at the nature of the relationship of these folks, look at that last week. And when you go back in the jury room and you start reviewing the exchanges of text messages, and we're not going to go through the detail of it here, it's not necessary because you're going to have them back in the jury room, you will be stunned by what you read. These are the phones they had that they lived that world in. A 5S, Apple phone that has never been opened. So we don't know the full messages. As Dr. Copeland said, he wished he had that because it may, in fact, affect his ability to make some decision on what he thought. Dr. Logan said the same thing. And Dr. Anderson, we'll talk about him, but it appears this is his first case like this, he may not have had the qualifications to do that. But we'll talk a little bit about these experts' qualifications as we go through it. And remember in my opening statement, I talked to you about the digital world that these young people live in? And remember the one detective who talked about things, Detective Barney talked about, they were doing something that was very dangerous. One was living with another person, one was married. The work situation was involved, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. These are the people Alexander Kozak was in fact texting and who he had a relationship with. Let's talk about them briefly. You notice one of them in there is not Deanna Brown, but the person that he took home all the time, who thought he was a pretty nice young man, never made any overtures to her, worked with her, didn't know him real well, but he did give her rides. We'll talk about her right now because she said she saw him on the 12th and described how his reaction was going. And his reaction was to such an extent that on a scale of 0 to 10, she said it was a 10. If she'd seen him like that later, she would have gotten some help. This is a 24, 25-year-old, was 25 when she testified, 24 who made these observations about him at that point based upon how she'd seen him act before. But one other thing, she'd heard a lot of argument going on because housekeeping was right next door to the security offices. And she said she'd heard a lot of these arguments going on for quite a while. What does that do? It shows that Dr. Logan, again, knows what he's talking about. It shows once again that this temper that he had with the argument was building up. It also shows something else that you'll find out later as I continue my argument. It shows that somebody was interfering with his work. We know now, the detectives didn't know then, that it was Andrea, but he also said, I will never rat you out. I will never rat you out. And look at all of his interviews. He takes the responsibility for everything. He says it's all him. He never once says that it's her. And we'll talk about why he gets to that point. We're talking two alternative theories here. I told you I was going to argue that this is a crime of passion, it should be manslaughter. But the other theory, if you see facts in there, may point to something else, which we don't believe the evidence supports, and that is second degree. We believe this evidence points to a manslaughter, voluntary manslaughter. And because the state says, well, it happens only in these kind of cases, look, folks, the court has given these instructions. The court gives the instructions because the evidence supports it. No matter what we say, that you have that as an alternative when you go back into the jury room. If the evidence was not there to support it, it wouldn't be here. Again, you've been instructed with regard to the statement by itself. You have to look at the mental capacity, the intelligence, the mental and emotional state at the time it was made, what was knowingly and intelligently made, and any other evidence related to it. And we're going to talk about all the other evidence that's related to it. So Google Map basically just shows it's 3.3 miles away. That's how far the house was from, his apartment was from the mall. That's his apartment building. Let's assume all of the witnesses agree it's a 10-minute, 15-minute drive. It's 3 miles away. You can't change the distance. That was the distance. The state just made an argument that completely contradicts their own expert's argument. Now, I don't agree with everything the expert said, and the evidence disputes it. But remember that one last statement we read last Friday? And it's important to go back and read it and show why the state's own argument contradicts their experts, and maybe they can explain that in rebuttal, which they're going to have a chance to do. They said this young man did this because of an ego. Their own expert said this man doesn't have an ego. He tested him. But when did he test him? He didn't test him on the 12th of June 2015. He tested him 2016. And this is what he said. They lead solitary lives, but they want to become accepted and involved with other people. Blocked by intense fear of being rejected and humiliated. They perceive themselves as socially inept, inferior, and inadequate, undervalue their achievements. In addition to fear and self-criticism, they frequently feel alone, empty, and isolated. They restrict their social environments. Folks, this is their own expert. So they get up and say it was ego? How in the world can it be ego when their expert who tested him said this man has no ego? So they make an argument that you buy into this theory that their expert has looked at, that's by doing these tests, and he says he doesn't have an ego, but yet they say he had an ego and that's why he did it. Which one is right? They're expert of what they say. They said the statements are not evidence. They said statements are not evidence. Their expert came in here and said he doesn't have an ego. So they're saying ignore my expert, and you can't. But you have to find the ego somewhere else. Where are you going to find it? Where's the evidence of it? Dr. Logan surely didn't say he had one. Dr. Anderson didn't say he had one. Dr. Coppola said he didn't have one. So where does he get it from? You can't create it out of whole cloth. You can't buy into it simply because they say it. They have to have evidence to support it. It's not so much that the evidence doesn't support it. The evidence contradicts it. Their own evidence that they brought into this courtroom contradicts their opening statement and contradicts their closing statement. And remember, I read that Friday, word for word, and I said, who are you talking about? He said, I'm talking about Alexander Kozak. That's what Dr. Coppola said, who they want you to accept as an expert in this case. Gotta go the right way. Let's talk about the experts for a minute, all right? The issue here is not that somebody was crazy, delusional, or out of their mind, couldn't recall the fact. You never heard us once present any evidence to that effect. That's not what this case is about. This case is about whether or not, under these circumstances, his responsibility is diminished. Don't go off into that wilderness that the state wants to lead you in this case. Stay focused on the evidence in this case. In this case, it says, look, we're not contesting any of those, not a single one of those facts that we're contesting. Not one. We're saying, look, you have to look at the evidence from people who are experienced in this area as it came into the evidence. Let's look at what lay people said. Let's just forget about experts for a moment, okay? Let's forget about experts. Let's just look at what lay people said. Wendy Robinson says at 3:30 he seems normal. Deanna Brown, who knew him perhaps better than most people, said he looked very angry, agitated, mad at Cy, couldn't let it go, couldn't take it anymore, couldn't do it anymore, walked away unresponsive, so angry he was shaking, agitated, face flushed, hands continually shaking, couldn't even see it was in his jaw, cheeks, 10 on a scale of 1 to 10. Would ask for help if she saw him again. What does their own witnesses say? Intensity in eyes, giant brown. That guy was scary. Smile, tipped hat, no words. Face was intense, focused, eyes fixed. straight ahead, no peripheral vision of anything. That's their own witness, Jeffrey Carew. Madison, the 15-year-old girl. This 15-year-old girl says something wasn't right about him. That's what the 15-year-old girl said. This is their own witness. Very focused. Kevin Elliott, the experienced law enforcement officer with the years, I believe, in the military. If I'm misquoting, I apologize, but I think he had some years in the military. He had an eerie calmness about him. That's how he described him, an experienced law enforcement official. And then what does Ruta Rodriguez say, the person they put so much stock in their closing argument? He says, like looking at a TV that's not turned on. Face emotionless, blank, no expression. What does Trooper Inchler, who arrested him, says? Calm, unemotional, cooperative. These are civilian witnesses who are observing this person at the time it's happening. These are their descriptions of this young man's face. We're not asking you, look, there is no responsibility here. There is responsibility here. But put responsibility where it belongs. This is what their own witnesses said about him. You remember we talked about examination, direct and cross-examination. They said cross-examination is one of the greatest engines ever created in the search for truth. Remember during voir dire, I asked you, I might be tough on some of these witnesses during cross-examination because it's part of my job, and you all indicated you expected that. That's how I do my job. I have to ask tough questions. And in the tough questions, it's my job to bring out factors that are favorable and that the witnesses speak the truth about them. That's my job. And in these issues, this is what came out from their own witnesses. This is not something that came from someone who didn't know him. They didn't know him. A couple of them did. This is how they describe him at that moment. Not one witness contradicts this. This is their witness's testimony. Now let's see what the experts say about that. I think it's important, first of all, to talk about the experts and the fact that these experts, let me see how I can put it. I could talk about Dr. Anderson pretty quickly. First case, hadn't done this before. $50,000 income comes from the state. Not a forensic, he'd like to be a forensic psychiatrist or something, they hadn't taken the test yet. Only works with people down at the Oakdale or the center that comes in. Everybody who comes in basically has a record. So that's what he came in to say. And clearly, you had a chance to observe him. You put him in the class. I mean, he's a great psychiatrist perhaps for eating disorders, but you put him in the class and you put Dr. Logan in. Do you? You can reject all the testimony, but folks, when it comes down to who are the experts, who do we accept, who are leading experts in this field? Remember, as you push as hard as I pushed him, he said, well, 30 years ago, Menninger was the tops. Look when Dr. Logan left Menninger when he was head of that psychiatric division. Remember asking the name of forensic psychiatrist Dr. Anderson, couldn't think of it, none in Iowa. So perhaps when you go to the best, Mr. Kozak should be punished for that, or points taken against him because he goes to the best that he can get. That's no reason to say, well, let's just not accept him because he happens to be the best. So that's Dr. Anderson. Let's talk a little bit about Dr. Copeland. Obviously, he wanted to be a forensic psychologist. We'll talk a little bit more about him. He is a psychologist. But one thing he says he does, he gathers all the information. And we know Dr. Anderson did not. Even though the state mentioned in the argument he talked to family, but we know Dr. Anderson didn't talk to family because he admitted he did. So let's talk about Dr. Copeland. Dr. Copeland could have been a forensic psychologist. He said he did not pass the test. He tried, but he couldn't do it, didn't have time to do it anymore. He was, in Utah, I think he said there's some classification you could get, but otherwise he didn't pass the test. And remember I asked him toward the end of his testimony, Could a forensic psychiatrist make a diagnosis as to what happened back on June 12th of 2015? He said, absolutely they could. Remember how he talked about the rigorousness of the test that you have to take in order to be a forensic psychologist? Not only did Dr. Logan pass the test, but he also was the person the United States turned to when people threatened the life of the President of the United States to determine whether or not that person was a danger or not. I remember I told you in opening he's a very modest man, does not like to talk about how qualified he is. But he came into this court, and obviously you can tell from his recall, you had a chance to watch him go through the file and compare him to the other experts who testified. He remembered stuff, including the N or the R in the DSM. That's the quality of expert that he is. They don't come in it better based upon the evidence that came during the course of this trial. And you're going to have his curriculum vitae back in the jury room. Just take a look at it. Just look at it. And look at what he's done. It doesn't matter why he came to this courtroom, but he's not going to come to this courtroom and waste his reputation by saying something that's inaccurate. He's going to come to the courtroom and lay out the facts as he sees them. Now, there's one small thing I want to mention here. And obviously you can get this point by emphasis and etc. Statements, arguments, and questions and comments by lawyers, it's not evidence, but responses are. Remember at one point I asked Dr. Logan, based upon your experience, your background, education, what you read about in this case, looking at all the records, including family members, etc., do you have an opinion of what was happening on June 12th? As to whether or not there was a medical condition impacting Mr. Kozak? You know what he said? His answer was yes. And I said, give us that opinion. And he explained it. Did you see a question like that coming from the state of Iowa to Dr. Copeland or to Dr. Anderson? Did you? Think about it. Think about it. Did they answer that question? Did you hear a response from your expert? Remember toward the end I asked on Friday, I asked Dr. Copeland, aren't you experienced? Couldn't you do that? He said, well, psychologists can't. Dr. Logan could, but I said, couldn't you do that? He said, well, yeah. Just think about it when you go back into the jury room. Maybe they can explain that when they come up for rebuttal, why that question wasn't asked. Maybe they say, well, maybe we want you to do the job. Remember what you said when we were picking you as jurors? You said if the state doesn't, in fact, establish the case for you, you are not going to go about looking for ways to solve this case for them. You said you would do it yourselves. You said that the state is supposed to do it, not you. Your job as jurors is to look at the evidence as it came in. What do all those experts say, though? Not that I picked on them a little bit. What did they all say? This is what they said, including Dr. High. They said it was a real, intimate, and bonded relationship. None of them disputed that fact. Not one person disputed the fact of the nature of the relationship. This is Andrea on the 9th talking to Alexander. "10:25 p.m. I love you, Alex." Andrea to Alexander. "Of course, I love you too." Wednesday, June 10th. "I know. I'm going to try to go to sleep now, though. Good night, love." Andrea to Alexander. Alexander to Andrea. "I got them for you because I love you." This is the 11th, the day before the incident. 6:42 p.m. Alexander to Andrea, 6:42. How is my love? Alexandra, Andrea, 8:21. I love you. 8:27 p.m., the night before this incident. Andrea to Alexandra at 8:27 p.m. I love you too. Well, let's talk about what these people taught in terms of the diagnosis here. Remember this long read that the prosecution had with Dr. Logan. It was an extremely long read. It was right out of the DSM-5. And in that, and one thing to bear in mind, all of these experts found some type of disorder. The question whether or not it was major. They found some issues with regard to Mr. Kozak, but Dr. Logan found the most serious one. And he designated it was in existence back June 12th of 2015. But let's see what they said. Their own, when she asked that question about Dr. She was just really, and that's her job, to ask tough questions of Dr. Logan. He said, well, no, it's a treating, the DSM-5 is treating. I don't have to follow that. He says, you know, I'm an expert. I know how to deal with these issues. Her own expert, Dr. Anderson, came in and said the same thing, and he said it does not have to be followed. This is the person who's an expert in food disorders. And he's telling her, he's telling me it does not have to be followed. What does Dr. Coppola say about it? He says, He says, it's a billing reference. And then he specifically says, it's not a Bible. It's not a Bible. Their own expert agreed with Dr. Logan. But what else do the experts say about this relationship, including Dr. High, that existed from November through June 12th? First of all, Dr. High talked about the number of people. 95% of young people communicate this way. 8,000 to 60,000 text messages were exchanged, and we don't know because you'll see at the end of this case, I will be making an argument that no one knows but the two of them what actually went on there. All of them agreed that it was intimate. All of them agreed that it was hot and cold. Dr. Logan said it was bent back and forth. He was bent back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, until we just snapped. There was no doubt that this relationship was strong, emotional, and intimate. Not one single expert witness disagreed with that. Now, what about friends and relatives? Well, we know now, as I said in my opening statement, that the friends and relatives didn't know about it. Remember Carly being shown just that small portion of the text messages right before the shooting occurred? And remember, she'd also changed her password right before the night or the morning of the shooting occurred, and she made special point that she wasn't going to give Miss Friedrichs a copy of that message. A copy of the password, because she put it in herself and then she switched the phone over to her to see what Alexander had in fact sent to her. Now, one thing about the phone records we can say too, we don't know everything that was going on, and the reason we don't, because the officers did not go out in a timely fashion to get all of those things. They indicated that they needed a search warrant. If you heard the fellow from U.S. Cellular come in and said, just sending out a subpoena, perhaps would have gotten that for them and they would have preserved them. But we also know that the unfortunate part of this is that we don't have Ms. Farrington's cell phone records because of the fact no one knows her password. Now, who did not know about this relationship that these folks had? Her own mother didn't know. Cassie knew, but she didn't follow it. She'd given her some advice to stay away from it. We know her good friend and person who worked in the mall with her and was going to go to this concert with her didn't know the full details of it, and that is Wendy Robbins. The lead detective in the case did not know anything about it. Connor said he knew everything, but it became obvious once you look at these messages that he perhaps did not. Remember what he said when that evidence started coming in, he walked out of the courtroom. And so...
You wouldn't have to object, as that's inappropriate to comment about what's going on in the courtroom from other people to imply that that's somehow testimony.
Overruled, he testified to that.
And, you know, Wendy Robbins said she did not know. And remember one person, his name, Mr. Izzy May, I could be butchering his name and I apologize, but he said he didn't know. But what was interesting about that, when I asked the question, again, questions are not evidence, but his response, that had he known, he perhaps would have treated him somewhat differently. Morally, he said it was a problem for him, but perhaps he wouldn't have threatened termination, which was part of the reason that Mr. Kozak blew up. But this man with 10 years experience with doing security work said that had he known the full story, perhaps he would have done something a little bit different. His sisters, Mr. Kozak's sisters, didn't know. Deanna Brown did not know. Scott Penrod did not know. Now let's look at this incident and just follow through again. When you're looking at this, let's forget about the experts for a few minutes. We're going to get back to them, but let's just forget about it. Let's talk about common sense. Let's talk about what you don't leave out of a courtroom when you walk in. Why don't we talk about what we've all talked to you about using once you go back into the jury room. Let's talk about it for a second. There was a note on his car. We know now that the note was thrown away. But we have three different interpretations of it. One is that he was asking for a date. Number two is that he was going to pay her way if to go with Wendy Robbins down to Kansas City to an Aldine festival. And the third is that it was some kind of a threatening note in some way. So wait a minute. He's a security guard and he's threatening folks? Well, what did the note really say? Well, we don't know. Is that some doubt as to what it said? But we know it adversely impacted his job because everyone has said that. So if the note says that he was just offering to pay her way to go to the concert with Wendy Robbins, who had never taken anyone on a concert that she worked at the mall with in 18 years, what's threatening about that? How should that interfere with his job? And if Wendy didn't know that she had a relationship with Kozak, wouldn't that change the whole equation? Let's look at the overreaction to the pepper spray incident. Well, we know the pepper spray incident where he overreacted, which is part of the incident that Dr. Logan refers to. And remember in openings I said, look, as we make this opening statement, work is still going on by the psychiatrist. Good people continue to do their work all the way up through trial. But the state wants to make some point out of the fact that it's a preliminary report. Well, if there was something to be concerned about, wouldn't you think you would have been known about it in opening statement? But we told you while we're doing this very thing. I looked at my notes. The doctors are still working. They were still reviewing material. They're getting ready to testify. So there's no hidden ball here. You knew these folks were still working, and I told you they were still working. Now, so there was an overreaction to the pepper spray that Dr. Logan talked about, that Sy indicated that he did. But coupled with the overreaction to the pepper spray was the incident involving Ms. Farrington, the second or possibly third time that he'd been chastised for that. There was the fire report that he blew up with regard to Wendy Robbins about when he blew up and he stormed out. all of these incidents goes to the IED, the intermittent explosive disorder. There is also the incident when Andrea calls Wendy, doesn't call her, texts Wendy to tell her about the fact that this young man had come up, that Kozak had come up to the booth. Now remember, at the same time, she's texting him about her, Wendy Robbins, about him coming up to the booth, she's making arrangements to see him. And she's talking to him. Now, forget about the fact that a doctor has now diagnosed him on that time as having intermittent explosive disorder. Just imagine him as a 21-year-old male. Forget about the mental disorders that two other experts found to some extent. Just forget about that. Just think about what she's doing to his job. And when you get to manslaughter, you've seen the instruction, the state put it up. Words alone are not enough. And we're not talking about words here, folks. We're talking about conduct, where she's interfering with his job. Because we know now that Cy told him, one more incident like this and you're out of here. And remember Jessica sending him text message, hey, you getting any luck finding another job? Nope, no other job. This man has no other place to go to work. We know that. But yet, for some reason, she's interfering with his job. Why? We don't know. We still don't know. But what we do know is that she was taking the idea that he gave her flowers, and every time she wanted to get her boyfriend upset, she would tell her boyfriend, Connor, about the flowers that came from Kozak. Why was she doing that? We don't know. Is it something a typical 20-year-old does? Or do we go back to Dr. Barney's statement and says, folks, this is dangerous. These are not just words anymore. This is conduct. Has there been any explanation as to why she was doing that? And there is one text message, again, it goes back to when they brought in these redacted messages, where she actually texts Wendy Robbins asking her if she's going to be at work, but if you go back and be at work, but if you look at the text right before that, she's trying to figure out when Alexander can come up and see her. At the same time that she's texting Wendy Robbins and saying, he's messing with me. Why is she doing that to him? Now let's mix in if Dr. Logan is right. Forget about the fact that he's right. Let's just think about the fact that he could be right. And she's doing this to a young man with this intermittent explosive disorder and this borderline personality disorder. That's who she's doing it to. Well, we know it would get any person upset at age 20 or 21 if they had no disorder. They're going to get angry. Just like Connor got angry because it pissed him off. So why is she doing that to him and his job? It's not just a boyfriend situation. This is a situation about a person's job who's constantly trying to get out of there. And she has to know he's trying to get out of his job because they're texting about it. So we know now, based upon this evidence, that the work situation is pretty tough. What did she say to him on June 10th? Let's look down here and see. This was a while ago. I'm just thinking about it. And he says, Andrea Alexander, I randomly sent him a picture of the roses you got me, and he got super pissed off. Not just normally pissed off, super pissed off. What does super pissed off mean? What does that mean? Why is she doing it to this person who's been with her for almost a year? Oh, I got you. But why would you do that? He asked her, why would you do that? Here's a young man with a mental disorder. He doesn't even know it. And he says, why are you doing that to him? His protective mechanism comes in for Connor. He wants to know why she's doing it to Connor. And she says, because I wanted to rub it in. Why though? That seems like a bad idea to have done it. Do I look like I give a shit? And then, what else does she do? She plays what in this relationship is an intimate, bonded relationship, and all the experts agree, a diabolical joke. The next one. The diabolical joke is, this is Connor on a text he sent the night before to her. This is Thursday the 11th. Not only he's got his job in jeopardy now from Kozak talking to him, not only does he have this other issue going through his head with regard to this relationship with staying away from her, not only is he stressed out at home at this point, not only is she switching him back and forth at this point in time in this relationship, but now she plays this diabolical thing saying, gotcha, I got you, I got you. What, go back to Detective Barney. This is dangerous stuff, folks. And then she tells him it's a joke and tells her, wire test at 9:26 a.m. Are you both playing a wicked game? Are you and Connor teaming up on me and playing some wicked game against me? Now, this is the 11th, and we're going to talk about how much sleep this young man has had up to this point. And remember, Dr. Copeland said, well, if he had some sleep and migraine issues, I probably would have sent him to a psychiatrist. And remember who examined him, the forensic psychiatrist, and what he found. And Dr. Copeland pretty well admitted at that point, this is out of his hands. He had to go to a psychiatrist. I'm not experienced in that area. And he said if he was one of his patients and had that kind of information on him, he would have sent him to someone like Dr. Logan. June 11th, look at this. Look at this conversation. Alexander, Andrea, I see Wendy working. Wendy, this is the message they had deleted, folks, from the first exhibit that came in. The one right, oops, uh-oh. I'll go back. The one right here. They said to protect, the state said in their examination, to protect the privacy. Wendy testified in court. So why are they protecting her privacy? Well, this is it, folks. I see Wendy's working. Andrea to Wendy. See the 606 message? Look at the 607 message. I'll be Saturday. Andrea to Alexandra. No, Sayas. Alexandra to Andrea. Weird. No, I definitely shouldn't come to see you. Andrea to Alexandra. Yeah, probably not. Alexandra to Andrea. Well, so much for that. Sorry. What are they doing, folks? It's the day before the incident. So the message that the state didn't want you to see is now in. You have the unredacted version to take back to the jury room. And again, if mine are incorrect in any way, go to LL or go to 28, and you'll be able to follow up on that. And then on the 11th, they start talking about the Chick-fil-A guy's number. And you see how that comes in on the 11th. Again, that's 7:25 p.m. So folks, we talked about, was this shooting by sudden, violent, irresistible passion resulting from a serious provocation? And again, words alone, however abusive or insulting, cannot be serious provocation. The state wants you to believe that this case is all about, are you mad? You've seen a case entirely different from that. You've seen a case entirely different from what Detective Ron knew about when he was sitting in the patrol car with this young man. You've seen a case that this young man didn't even understand. That's what this case is brought here to Story County. So you can look at the facts, unrestricted by outside pressure. Remember, we also talked about TV cameras and all of that, and you said, well, your job is to look at the evidence, focus on the evidence. You were given full alert about the nature and significance of this trial. And so you've had an opportunity to know that. So the question is, I want you to do two things for a moment. Think about no experts and what you just observed. Think about no experts at all, the 20, 21-year-olds. Now let's put the experts in. See what's happening? See what's happening? You know, Bob Dylan has a great song, and I can't think of the name of it, but he says, you don't need a weatherman to tell you which way the wind's blowing. You don't need a weatherman to tell you which direction the wind's blowing. This is Mr. Kozak's wedding picture that the state introduced. What's interesting about it is that he's wearing dark outfit and the hat that they introduced to every witness who came up, which was not in dispute, the fedora. He put the fedora on that night. Remember Wendy Robbins coming in and saying, well, part of their training is to know where all the security cameras are? He knew where all the cameras were. He knew where every camera in the place. He was the security guard. He wore a fedora into an Iowa City mall. Give me a break, folks. He wore a fedora, dressed in black, through the cameras. And he parked in a handicapped spot. And he walked in. And without doubt, it was a horrific act. He had $6 in his pocket. And how do we know that? Because we know he stopped and got $200, and then when they arrested him, he had $206. This is the plan they're telling you about? Where he threw his toys from childhood in his car and drove east, where there's not a single witness who's ever come in to say this man is headed east on Interstate 80. He knows Texas, he knows Osage, he knows Granbury, Texas. With $6 in his pocket, that's his plan, to go in where he knows where every camera angle is, in a fedora, where people knew him, and he does this act, this horrific act. Sounds like a plan, all right. Sounds like a plan that fits the description of what Dr. Logan says, or it sounds like an angry person who feels they've been led on, they can't control their anger, and they don't know what to do, and they just snap. Throws his toys in. Now, his toys happen to be guns and knives, but his mom says he's been carrying guns since he's old enough to walk. And there are people in our society who do that. But that's not what this case is all about. I told you when I was picking the jury, when we were just picking you, I didn't get a gun until I got into the Army for the first time. So some people, because my mama wouldn't let us have them. But there are people who grew up just the opposite, who let people have guns all the time. And he grew up before he could walk, he had a gun, according to his mom. So yeah, this is a plan. That's what the state, but no one is disputing that he couldn't plan or couldn't remember. That's not part of his disorder. He can't control himself when he got that way and was slowly building up, and it led to it. But without the experts, it still led to it. So let's look at his facial expression. I won't repeat what the state said about this incident, about when the message came in, are you mad? Because our argument is this was building up long before this. It was the back and forth, as Dr. Logan explains, until he snapped. And as Dr. High explained, it was a relationship, obviously, that was hot and cold. Look what happens from 10 minutes to 6, or 5:50, to 8:30. Is there one incident where he says one word to anybody? Other than the text to Jessica, is he communicating at all? This fellow who communicates all the time, whose constant text messages, as you will see in Exhibit A. This is Exhibit A right here. This is young man text messages, both sides. From 5:50, and you'll be able to put that back into perspective of the time. It's not a single voice interaction. Tells you a little bit of something. Use your common sense when you go through thinking about that. It's almost 2 hours and 47 minutes. It's absolutely no voice or face interaction. When you get back in the jury room and you start evaluating which degree of responsibility that Alex should have, you should look at, and obviously you have to do what you have to do as jurors, you have to look at the factors as if there are no experts, and again as if there are experts in this case. And from the evidence, you can look at this case as if there were no experts. And let me add another factor that you're going to find, and why we outlined the text messages the way we did in T2. It's absolutely fascinating what you're going to find. What you're going to find is that on June 8th, Alexander and Andrea were texting each other up until 1:57 a.m. This is June 8th. This is Monday, okay? On Tuesday, they were texting each other until 1:24 a.m. This is Tuesday. On Wednesday, June 10th, they're texting, and the nature of the text messages are this. And I want you to think of it in this context. Remember Kelly's testimony? It was texting all the time. He would sleep with the phone right by his bed. She would hear the beep go off. She asked him, she said, I slept well that night. Did you sleep well? Her response, because we don't have his messages at that point, she says, I'm sorry. There's an inference that he didn't sleep. On Thursday, June 11th, we know that's the night he goes to the movie with Kelly. They get back and they start texting. They are texting to 12:55 a.m. What else do we know about Friday that morning? All right, this is what we know. Now, The reason I say they are fascinating, because it goes to the, you'll see, Alexander wasn't sleeping. And remember I asked Dr. Copeland that question about his sleep, and would that have some impact on his ability to think, to be rational? And let me bring up one quick point on that. Do you remember Dr. Copeland on Friday afternoon, he started raising his eyes and wiping his eyes quite a bit, and he couldn't remember a couple of times as to where the state was asking him questions? Remember what he said? He said, it's been a long day. That's Dr. Copeland, the psychologist they brought in. And he had to be refocused on something. He said it's been a long day. Well, if you look at the text messages, and when he was sleeping, this man wasn't sleeping. He was texting and he couldn't sleep, and he woke up at 3 a.m. with a migraine. And he never went back to sleep. And when was the last time he went back to sleep? It was at, well, we don't know at that point, but we know he finished with Detective Ron at 1:15 that Friday. So you go back and you look at those text messages, and you will see on the text messages that 1:57, 1:24 a.m., then she says, I'm sorry, when she asked him to, the inference is that, did you get any sleep? And they fell asleep texting. She wakes up the next morning because Andrea falls asleep. And then they text until after he comes back from Jurassic World, or whatever the movie is, to 12:55 a.m. And he doesn't sleep anymore until after the interview. These are 20, 21-year-old kids. They're mixed up. And as the detective said, they were playing a very dangerous game. One was leading the other on with all of the evidence, and you will get a chance to review those text messages. And they developed what can be called an intimate, bonded relationship on the internet. It was a time of bonding, and that's what they did. It was on and off relationship, and it was lived, as I said in my opening statement, in a world of secrecy. They had no filters. We also know that Alex, without a doubt, was being banged back and forth, much like a ping pong ball, and he did not have the mental skills that a person of his age or any age should have had. His job was being jeopardized by the same person who told him she loved him. And as Cy described when he told him about this encounter that he was going to get terminated, Cy said he was shocked. Alex's coping skills were at their absolute limit. Perhaps they should have been long before that, and someone would have recognized it, and we wouldn't be here today. But he became like a man on an island in auto mode, and he had no close friends. And he erupted like a volcano. As I said in my opening statement, they forged a relationship that ended in tragedy. They entered a digital world that was complicated, confusing, and doomed to explode. Really, only the two of them know the full story. It was a horrific act. Nothing excuses it, but diminished capacity and responsibility explains it. And Andrea is gone. But this is not a case about a wounded ego. Their own experts tell you that. It's a case about a young man, small, socially stunted, absorbed in a fantasy, mystical world of superheroes and rescue fantasies and video games and even anti-heroes. It's about a young woman turned into a swan, so sad in high school, but going through transforming surgery, was beautiful, dating, and finding a newfound freedom with her attention. It was intense, mostly secret, that these two young people had shared for months. But it was also about dependency and manipulation. Alex was Andrea's fallback and her safety net. Alex made Andrea feel good about her, self-confident, and she craved the kind of attention he gave her, becoming quickly dependent on him for emotional support. Alex was kind and thoughtful. At the end of the day, you each are going to have to go back into this jury room and you're going to have to make this decision based upon the evidence that came in through the courtroom. I won't get a chance to come back when the state is completed with its rebuttal of my argument. All I ask is that, and all we can any ask is that as you in fact go in and review the evidence, you review it in the context that it came in during the course of the trial. As you indicated in the voir dire and the instructions that you've indicated you would follow in the admonitions, you do it in that fashion. Because that's all we can ask in our society as we get these difficult cases. If the case was easy, you all wouldn't be here. And I don't imagine anyone in this courtroom would want to be in your shoes. But this case really is about the youth and how they're developing in our society and how poor technology is getting ahead of us. But it's also about passion and the oldest story in the world, and that's about love. And all these stories about young people, who we see and who we deal with, and we often wonder, where do we go from here? But one thing that's a constant in all of this, and I tell folks it's the reason I keep doing what I'm doing, because really the law kind of gives us a guide. It just gives us the most amazing guide, and we all sit sometimes and we criticize our judicial process and why it fails us, but it's a beauty. As I told you when we were selecting you as jurors, really this system doesn't work without you. And it's why this system is really one of the greatest human creations made, the jury system in the United States of America, and it's the envy of the world. And what you're about to embark on is what not only keeps us focused, but really what makes this country great. I mean, it really is. There's not many other things, but this jury system is really what makes it great. And the law has a way, at the end of the day, of giving us a guide. And this guide tells you, at the end of the day, when you remove your emotions, when you look at the evidence like all jurors are supposed to look at it, no matter how difficult or how easy the case is, it's going to tell you, remember, you're the judges of the fact. And what your job is to do at the end of the day is to find the truth. This Blinken has given me a message. but it's to find the truth. Find the truth. And what do you do when you find the truth? You do justice. That's all Mr. Kozak is asking for in this case. Just do justice. Do what's right. He knows he's responsible. He's not responsible for first-degree murder in this case, folks. He's not responsible for second-degree murder. He loved this woman. It was a crime of passion. Thank you.
Ms. Linus.
They would approach her.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take just a 5-minute restroom break in case anybody needs to go, or if you'd like to stretch out, please return at 10 till. Remember your admonition during the break.
I just recorded now recess.